Welcome, dear listener. Settle yourself comfortably and allow your body to sink into stillness. Imagine the sound of distant waves lapping against a wooden hull, a rhythm steady and unchanging. Tonight, we will step back in time, men to the 19th century, when the world's oceans were filled with a slow, steady passage of great sailing ships. These were vessels of wood and canvas, carrying men and goods across vast expanses of water. Their journeys were not measured in hours or days, but in weeks and often months. Time stretched differently there, guided by tides, winds, and the creak of ropes straining against masts. In this story, we will drift gently through 4 scenes. First, we will immerse ourselves in the daily life of the sailors, their routines and small rituals, and the atmosphere of a ship at sea. Then, we will turn to the life of a notable figure or event tied to this maritime world. Later, we will explore mysteries and cultural aspects of ocean travel, unfolding the traditions, the superstitions, and the archaeology of the sea. Finally, we will contrast the ordinary seaman's life with the experiences of captains, officers, and the wealthier passengers who sometimes traveled aboard. Let your mind drift with the waves, unhurried and calm. There is no need to hold onto every detail. Simply allow the imagery of the ship and its people to float gently past, like sails moving across the horizon. So, let us begin. Imagine yourself standing on the wide wooden deck of a 19th-century sailing ship. The boards beneath your feet are darkened with salt and seawater, worn smooth by countless footsteps. Around you rises a forest of masts and rigging, lines of rope crisscrossing the sky. Above, the sails billow gently, pale against the endless blue. The air is alive with quiet movement, the slap of canvas catching the wind, the groan of wood adjusting to the pressure, and far below, the deep, muffled rush of the sea as it carries the ship forward. The day was divided into watches, shifts that rotated through the hours, ensuring that someone was always at work, whether under the bright sun or the pale glow of the moon. A sailor might be called to climb the rigging, to furl or unfurl sails, or to scrub the decks with sand and seawater, keeping the ship clean and free from the slippery buildup of salt and grime. Food was simple, and it was measured carefully. Barrels of salted meat, casks of hardtack biscuits, and dried peas were common fare. The biscuits, often as hard as stone, were softened in broth or tea. The taste was plain and sometimes unpleasant, yet it sustained the men. Fresh water was stored in wooden casks, though with time it could grow stale, faintly tinged with the wood that held it. On rare occasions, when the ship reached a port or an island, fresh produce was taken aboard, and those moments were welcomed with quiet joy. Below deck, the living quarters were dim and cramped. Imagine a low-ceilinged space where hammocks swayed gently with the motion of the waves. The air was heavy with dampness and the mingled scents of tar, rope, and human presence. Privacy was scarce. A man's hammock and his small chest of belongings were often all he could call his own. Despite the hardships, there was a rhythm to shipboard life that grew familiar. The ringing of the ship's bell marked the passing of hours, a steady sound that became part of the sailor's inner sense of time. 6 bells might announce the middle of the day watch. 8 bells might signal the end of a long shift. In this way, the hours were measured not by clocks, but by sound, routine, and duty. Work was demanding, but in the rare quiet moments, sailors found ways to pass the time. Some carved small trinkets from scraps of wood or bone. Others mended clothing, stitched sails, or sang low songs that rose and fell with the sea's own rhythm. The voices might be tired, but there was comfort in the shared sound, weaving a sense of community among men who often came from far different places. At night, imagine the deck under the stars. Far from land, the sky was vast and brilliant, the stars clearer than most people on shore could ever hope to see. A sailor on watch might lean against the rail, listening to the gentle splash of water and gazing upward at constellations that guided their course. For centuries, mariners relied on the stars, not only for navigation, but for a sense of orientation in the endless expanse of the sea. Yet beneath this calm life, aboard ship was always edged with risk. Storms could arrive suddenly, turning the calm sea into a chaos of waves and wind. Men worked swiftly, often in silence, hauling ropes, climbing into the rigging, even in rain and darkness. Their survival depended not only on strength, but on trust in one another. But when the storm passed, calm would return, just as suddenly. The sea, once angry, would smooth into a glassy plain. The sails would fill once more, and life would settle back into its slow rhythm. And so, it went, days of work, moments of rest, the endless movement of water beneath them. A sailor's life was one of repetition, of endurance, and of waiting. Waiting for land, waiting for orders, waiting for the next dawn. As you picture this daily life, let your thoughts move slowly, like the rocking of the ship itself. Each detail, the sound of the waves, the feel of the wooden deck. The dimness below deck treats a rhythm, steady and constant, just as the sailors experienced long ago. Now that you have settled into the daily rhythm of life at sea, let us turn our attention to one particular figure whose story helps us understand what it meant to command and to endure such a world. Imagine, if you will, Captain Charles Darwin's voyage on HMS Beagle in the 1830s. Though Darwin himself was not the captain, he was a young naturalist. Aboard the Beagle's long journey offers a window into the experience of a 19th-century voyage. The man in command was Captain Robert FitzRoy, a disciplined and serious naval officer. His life and his relationship with the sea can help us glimpse the balance of responsibility, duty, and hardship aboard such a vessel. FitzRoy came from a naval tradition, trained in the ways of command and seamanship. He was meticulous, deeply conscious of order, and perhaps burdened by the immense responsibility of guiding a crew across uncertain waters. The Beagle's voyage lasted nearly 5 years, a span of time that to us may feel almost unimaginable. Half a decade of life bounded by the horizon, months at sea without sight of land. Darwin, in his journals, often described the relentless motion of the ship, the discomforts of seasickness, and the endless routine. He noted the cramped quarters where officers and gentlemen passengers shared small cabins, while the sailors slept in their hammocks in the lower decks. FitzRoy bore the responsibility for all of them, from the lowest deckhand to the scientists and gentlemen passengers. Life as a captain was very different from that of an ordinary sailor. Yet it was far from easy. The captain carried the weight of every decision: where to sail, when to take shelter, how to ration provisions. Imagine the pressure of knowing that a wrong judgment could mean hunger, delay, or disaster. The captain's cabin was more spacious than those of the sailors, but still narrow and simple by our standards. A small desk, maps, and instruments filled the room. The air often smelled of ink, paper, and the faint tang of sea salt that crept in no matter how carefully doors were shut. Navigation was an art and a science. FitzRoy and his officers relied on sextants, chronometers, and charts. Each day, the position of the ship was calculated by observing the sun at noon or the stars at night. Errors could be costly, for there were no satellites, no radio signals, only human judgment in the heavens above. Tensions sometimes rose during such long voyages. Darwin and FitzRoy, though respectful of one another, often disagreed. Darwin's curiosity and openness to new ideas contrasted with FitzRoy's firm and sometimes rigid outlook. Imagine the quiet discussions in the captain's cabin, voices low but serious, as they debated the meaning of what they saw in distant lands. Yet, beyond such conversations lay the constant demands of running the ship. The crew looked to their captain for steadiness, whether in calm waters or in the height of a gale. Storms tested FitzRoy's resolve, as they tested every mariner's. Picture the Beagle heaving in heavy seas, the decks slick with rain, sails reefed tightly to prevent disaster. FitzRoy would stand on deck, shouting orders through the wind, every movement measured against the danger of losing men or ship. And then, when the storm passed, he would return below, where the flickering light of an oil lamp illuminated maps scattered across the desk. There, he would mark their course, steady once again. The voyage of the Beagle was not filled with battles or great naval victories. It was, instead, a journey of endurance and discovery. It reminds us that much of maritime history was not about war, but about patience, survival, and the gathering of knowledge. Darwin's discoveries would change the world of science, but they were made possible by the structure, order, and resilience that FitzRoy maintained. Even as Darwin collected specimens and filled his notebooks, the sailors carried out their endless duties. Their hands were rough with rope burns, their bodies weathered by wind and salt. FitzRoy, though above them in rank, shared the same sea, the same storms, the same long passage of time. The ship was its own small world, bound together by necessity. When at last the Beagle returned to England after nearly 5 years, it had carried its men across tens of thousands of miles. The voyage had been a test of patience and a reminder of the immense distances of the world. FitzRoy, though remembered less than Darwin, had guided them safely home. And so, the story of Captain FitzRoy and the Beagle is not one of dramatic battles, but of quiet endurance, careful leadership, and the unending rhythm of the sea. His life reminds us that the ocean demanded constant vigilance, even from those who commanded. Take a moment to imagine yourself in that world, seated in the captain's cabin. The lamplight swaying gently, the sound of waves against the hull. Outside, the stars shine cold and clear, guiding the ship across a silent sea. Inside, the work of command continues, measured and steady, just as the sea itself moves without end. Beyond the daily routines and the figures who commanded these ships, there is another layer to the world of 19th-century sailing. The traditions, the mysteries, and the cultural fabric woven into life at sea. For sailors, the ocean was not simply a physical space. It was a living presence, vast and unknowable. To cross it safely required not only skill, but also rituals and beliefs that lent comfort in uncertain waters. Imagine, for example, the practice of crossing the equator. When a ship sailed from the northern hemisphere into the southern, the crew would often hold a ceremony. Men who had never before crossed were considered pollywogs, and they were initiated by those who had the shellbacks. These rituals could be rough, sometimes playful, sometimes humiliating, but they carried a sense of continuity, shared acknowledgement of the sea's mysteries. The equator was not visible on the water, yet sailors felt its crossing as something profound, a boundary both real and symbolic. Superstition filled many corners of shipboard life. Whistling on deck, for example, was often discouraged, for sailors believed it might summon a storm. Cats, on the other hand, were welcome companions, their presence thought to bring luck and keep vermin at bay. A sailor might carry a charm, a coin, or a scrap of cloth tied to the rigging, trusting that it would keep the worst of the ocean's anger away. Songs, what we now call sea shanties, were another form of culture, practical as well as communal. These steady, rhythmic tunes helped men haul ropes in unison, their voices rising and falling with the effort. The words often spoke of home, of distant harbors, or of the sea itself. Imagine the sound of many voices blending together in the salt air, keeping time with the pull of the sails. The songs soothed the monotony of labor, giving the men a sense of connection and rhythm amid the endless expanse. There were also darker mysteries. Ships sometimes vanished without explanation, claimed by storms or reefs, or simply lost beyond sight of land. Families on shore waited for months, even years, before giving up hope. To this day, the sea holds countless wrecks, their stories silent beneath the waves. Archaeology has revealed fragments of this world. China cups, personal belongings, tools, and pieces of rigging recovered from wreck sites. Each artifact tells of a journey interrupted, a life once lived aboard a ship. A spoon, tarnished with age, may remind us that meals were once eaten here. A shoe, water-worn, speaks of the person who walked across a wooden deck centuries ago. In ports around the world, traces of maritime culture can still be seen. Inns and taverns where sailors gathered between voyages, carvings etched into wood by idle hands, and logbooks that recorded winds and cargo all speak of lives intertwined with the ocean. To the men of the 19th century, the sea was both a livelihood and a mystery of force, too vast to conquer, yet too important to ignore. Consider, too, the ritual of keeping the logbook. Each day, officers carefully noted the ship's position, the weather, and the work accomplished. These records were precise, yet between the lines lies a sense of uncertainty. For while the numbers and words are steady, the ocean itself was always shifting. It was a reminder that even in a world of careful observation, mystery remained. Sailors also carried with them cultural stories and beliefs. Some spoke of ghost ships, spectral vessels glimpsed at sea like the famed Flying Dutchman doomed to sail forever. Others told tales of sea creatures, imagined or real. Their minds, perhaps, influenced by the sudden appearance of whales, dolphins, or unfamiliar fish. In the vast quiet of the open sea, such stories filled the gaps between reality and imagination, turning long nights into a tapestry of wonder and unease. These traditions and mysteries were not frivolous. They gave meaning to the endless days, a sense of order to the uncertainty. They bound men together, offering comfort against loneliness. And they connected the ship's small world to a larger, older sense of humanity's relationship with the sea. As you think on these customs, the superstitions, the quiet rituals, let them drift across your mind like a soft tide. They are fragments of culture, echoes of voices long gone, carried still by the memory of ships that once moved steadily across the horizon. So far, we have imagined the life of ordinary sailors, their routines, hardships, and customs. But aboard a grand 19th-century sailing ship, there was always a sharp contrast between the world of the lower deck and that of the officers, captains, and in some cases, paying passengers. Picture, once more, the vessel itself. The lower decks are dim and crowded, hammocks swaying close together. The air filled with dampness and the mingled smells of tar, wood, and humanity. Now, climb the narrow steps to the upper deck and then into the captain's quarters. The change is immediate. The captain's cabin was still small by any modern measure, but it carried a sense of authority and order. There might be a real bed instead of a hammock, a sturdy desk, and shelves lined with books and charts. Oil lamps cast a steadier glow, their glass chimneys protecting the flame from the ship's constant motion. A brass telescope might rest on the table, polished and well used. Here, decisions were made, courses plotted, and correspondence written. The space was a world apart from the crowded hammocks below, yet still bound by the same swaying timbers and the endless sound of the sea. Officers, too, had their own mess, separate from the sailors. Their meals were modest, but more refined, perhaps salted beef, preserved fruits, or even wine brought from port. The distinction was not merely in comfort, but in the clear hierarchy of life at sea. Rank determined not only duty, but also diet, sleeping space, and even the tone of conversation. On passenger-carrying ships, such as those ferrying immigrants across the Atlantic, the differences could be even starker. Wealthier passengers, traveling in cabins, might enjoy meals served at tables, with linen and china carefully set despite the rocking of the waves. They had chairs, books, and sometimes even a small piano to pass the time. Their cabins were narrow, but decorated with curtains, rugs, or framed pictures brought from home. In contrast, emigrants in steerage traveled in conditions not so different from the sailors. They crowded into long, low-ceilinged spaces with rough wooden bunks stacked side by side. Privacy was scarce, and air often scarce as well. Meals were simple bread, porridge, salted mead, canned water rationed. For them, the voyage was not a temporary duty, but a life-changing passage, the hope of a new beginning in a distant land. This contrasts the world of officers and wealthy passengers, and the world of sailors and emigrants defined much of shipboard life. Yet, for all the separation, every soul aboard depended on the same vessel. A storm did not spare the rich or the poor, the captain or the deckhand. When the sea rose high and the winds howled, all listened to the same creak of timbers. All felt the same lurch of the deck beneath their feet. And so, there was a paradox. Sharp divisions of class and rank existed, but in the face of the ocean, everyone shared a common vulnerability. The ocean was the great equalizer, reminding all aboard that no wealth or authority could command the wind or calm the waves. At times, glimpses of humanity softened the divide. A captain might share words of encouragement with a weary sailor. A wealthy passenger might give a coin or a kind word to a child in steerage. Music, too, could bridge the gap, the sound of a fiddle or a sailor's song carrying across the deck, momentarily uniting listeners in the shared rhythm of the sea. Imagine now the entire ship as a floating community suspended between sky and water. Each person, officer, sailor, emigrant, had their place, their duties, and their hopes. Yet together, they formed a fragile whole, reliant on one another and on the strength of the vessel. This balance of difference and dependence shaped every voyage of the 19th century. It was not only a journey across water, but also a journey through the intricate layers of society, carried together upon the rolling sea. And so, our voyage aboard the 19th century sailing ship draws to a close. We have walked the worn planks of the deck, felt the sway of hammocks below, and watched the steady hands of sailors as they hauled ropes against the pull of the wind. We have glimpsed the quiet burden of command carried by a captain, and the vast patience required for voyages that lasted not days, but years. We have listened to the superstitions and songs that gave rhythm to the endless days at sea. And we have seen the contrast between the ordinary sailor's rough existence and the more comfortable lives of officers and passengers above. In all of this, one truth remains. The sea was constant. It shaped every life aboard, binding together men of different ranks, different nations, and different purposes. It was a space of danger and endurance, but also of beauty and ever-shifting horizon. A canopy of stars, a rhythm as steady as breathing. When we look back across the centuries, it is easy to marvel at the courage and resilience of those who lived by the sea. Yet it is also worth remembering their humanity, their quiet moments of rest, their small rituals of comfort, and their longing for land, for home, for the familiar smells and sights far beyond the ocean's edge. As you let these images drift through your mind, think of the ship as a cradle upon the waves, rocking gently, endlessly, carrying its people forward through time and space. That same rhythm of the sea calm, steady, enduring, can carry you now, guiding you toward stillness. The creak of timbers, the flap of sails, the slow toll of the ship's bell, all fade into the distance. What remains is a sense of calm, of being carried safely, without urgency, into rest. So let the voyage recede, as if the ship is slipping quietly beyond the horizon. You are safe here, surrounded by calm waters, the journey complete. Rest now, and let the sea's rhythm ease you into sleep.